Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to Coffee Talk! That's right, it's Coffee Talk! Today, we're going to be talking about the Akashic Records. That's right, the Akashic Records. So what are the Akashic Records? Well, the general idea is that there is somewhere in the universe, kind of floating around in another dimension, a place or thing called the Akashic Records, or the Hall of Records. According to modern interpretations of this and modern, I think, theories, this is where all knowledge stems from. And this is the place where artistic, what's the word I'm looking for? Muse. Your artistic muse comes from. People who believe in the Akashic Records pretty much credit it for every cool thing that man has ever thought of. We must have tapped into the Akashic Records. In fact, on this very channel, during my autobiography called Perils of an Interesting Life, I talked about how I somehow in the winter of 1979 tapped in to something, and I believe I got this download from God, but people are saying, no, you tapped into the Akashic Records, and that's why you suddenly could play music and understand music without having had any music lessons. So, the Akashic Records is, in some people's views, responsible for most every good thing that comes down the road. Modern believers of the Akashic Records believe that you can go there and view every one of your previous lives in detail. And they claim the Akashic Record contains, that it's a library of sorts that lives in the ethosphere. And this library contains all human knowledge, all extraterrestrial knowledge, all knowledge of God, all knowledge of the universe. Every question can be answered because contained in the Akashic Record is everything that has ever happened in your life, in my life, in every life of every human being that's ever lived, both now and in the past. And every creature and every animal's interpretation, every bird's eye view, everything the fly on the wall heard is contained in the Akashic Records. So where does this idea come from? How ancient is the idea of Akashic Records? And have we been accessing the Akashic Records intentionally for centuries or eons? Now I need coffee. I need coffee in my tiny coffee cup. I have a small coffee cup because this is going to be a short coffee talk, I think. Because there is no information on the Akashic Records. If you go and do a search on the Akashic Records, what you will find is guru, New Age guru after New Age guru, weird incense breathing, tofu eating, patchouli smelling like hippie that you've ever seen. Every sandal wearing weirdo you've ever seen in your life is going to have a video on how to decalcify your pineal gland, your third eye, so you can access your Akashic Records and become a whole person. You'd think something so widespread and so deeply believed would be something with a long history. But if you do the research on it, you'll find out that it's really barely more than 100 years old. The concept, the idea of the Akashic Records, at least the name and the fleshed out version that we have now, is fairly recent. And if you saw my Unmasking the Dark Side, I talked about a woman named Madame Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the founder of the Theosophical Society. It was her who coined the term Akashic. And really, she never said Akashic Records, I don't think, or talked about them. But the people that came after her, that studied after her, they fleshed out this idea. You know, let's start with what the word means. Akasha simply means space or air. So you could call this a space library. Let's all go down to the space library. But it really refers to an ethosphere, a power source that surrounds the planet that anyone can tap into for various reasons, and the Akashic Records are just part of this ethosphere. So, Madame Blavatsky, she coined the term Akasha or Akashic, And it was her followers that would come up with the Akashic Records idea. And probably the person that pushed this idea the most and popularized it the most was a man named Edgar Cayce Jr. Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce. This guy. Do you know about Edgar Cayce? So Edgar Cayce is a guy who, when he was little, started showing really weird talents, gifts, and abilities. For instance, he's claimed to be able to put as a child, be able to put a textbook from school underneath his pillow when he went to bed. And he discovered this by accident when he needed to be propped up, when he couldn't breathe good. His mom put some of his school books under his bed, and he woke up in the next morning knowing everything in them like he had read them and studied them in detail. And so he was able to absorb a book learning by laying his head down on it and going to sleep. Later on, Edgar Cayce would make a fairly decent living and become a very famous person by going into a trance and giving people readings. And the way he would do this is that he would simply take off his shoes. It was a ritual. He would take off his shoes, loosen his belt, take off his tie and loosen the button on his shirt, lay back on a couch, and immediately he would fall into a trance. In this trance state, he could, for instance, diagnose illnesses and propose a cure, and he could tell you things about your life. He could read your mail, and he claimed that he was accessing this from a great library, the Akashic records of everything, and that he claimed to accurately predict. A lot of people believe he accurately predicted the future. He wrote down every prediction and every reading he ever made, and it's kept in a library, his own library, a written library. And so he had a really successful career, and he claimed that he got his information from the Akashic records. People who believe in the Akashic records claim that it was Nostradamus's tool as well, that he used various different occultic techniques to transport himself to the Akashic records, and this is how he was able to view history before it happened. So Nostradamus's gifting apparently was just his ability to get into the Akashic records. Another thing about Edgar Cayce is that he had a lot of interesting predictions that haven't come to light yet. He predicted that eventually there would be found underneath the Sphinx the Sphinx in Egypt, a secret room where it would contain a library of metal discs that, once we figure out how to play them, would contain all of the known history of humankind and extraterrestrial seeding of this planet, and that we would hear once and for all the story of the gods from the gods if we could just get permission to get underneath the Sphinx and get into the library. And he claimed that this would eventually happen, and I think it's supposed to happen soon. And some claim there has been a library discovered underneath the Sphinx, or at least a room. Will we produce from this room these big metal discs that we can put on our put in our DVD players or whatever, and get all of this data and information about the secrets of the universe? I don't know what to think about the Akashic records. I will say this, that when I was receiving that download that allowed me to be such a great piano player, and it happened overnight, it just seemed like I was plugged into something. I've always seen it as a download from God directly to my brain, as a gifting, as a package of abilities, and given to me all at once and fed through to me that one winter to make me into the man that I am today. But some people would say that I just somehow managed to accidentally tap into the Akashic records. I don't know. I'd rather be gifted than good. So, it would require some kind of arrogance for me to think I had something to do with that, when in fact I just prayed that God would make me a good piano player, and that I could do the job that my dad had put me into as being the church piano player. And I prayed that every day, and I got a download from God. Now, whether he just hooked my cable up to the Akashic record from the right portion of it and gave me the download, or whether it was this gift wrapped thing that God gave to me for me personally, I know I received something. Did I receive it from God or from the Akashic records? Or is the Akashic records just God's library and storehouse for all his greatness? Tell me what you think about the Akashic records on Coffee Talk. As you can see, I'm all out of coffee. I had a little cup today, but it was a little topic. We'll see you next time on Coffee Talk.